Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Coffee with Courtney. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Courtney Bailey. I am an international English language educator, teacher trainer, and doctoral researcher. I currently serve as the Intensive English Programs Coordinator with NAFSA, and I also work as a virtual educator with the U.S. Department of State, where my focus centers on equity, access, and responsible practices in English language education worldwide. I'm really pleased to be back with you today for a follow-up conversation with the team behind English Language Standards Advisory Authority, also known as ELSA. In our first episode of Coffee with Courtney, we had the opportunity to meet the people behind ELSA and to better understand what this organization stands for. We explored ELSA's mission, its role in the broader English assessment landscape, and we unpacked a critical concept that often goes overlooked in testing conversations: duty of care. That first conversation helped position ELSA as an independent entity with a clear interest in English language proficiency standards on a global scale, particularly in relation to fairness, transparency, and responsible test use. Today's conversation builds directly on that foundation. I'm joined again by members of the ELSA leadership team, Stephen Carey, Karen Ottawell, and Mir Rahman. Sandy Bangal is also a key member of this group and very much a part of this work, but unfortunately could not join us today. In this episode, we're shifting our focus toward impact and evidence. We'll be talking about how ELSA's work is influencing conversations around equity, reliability, security, and access in English language assessment, and what this means for institutions, educators, and learners navigating an increasingly complex testing landscape. So with that said, we'll dive right in. We have a lot to cover and we'll be moving quickly through these questions. So under the theme of impact and evidence, Karen, I'll start with you. On the global stage, what evidence do you see of ELSA's work influencing equity and policy around English language assessment?
Well, thank you for a great starting question, Courtney. Really, ELSA, we're looking to provide kind of a credible, independent forum in which assessment professionals, researchers, practitioners from multiple regions and sectors can interrogate issues of fairness, of access and validity in English language assessment. We're looking to foreground topics such as test impact, inclusion of diverse test taker populations, ethical use of assessment data, and the consequences of high stakes testing for migration and for education purposes. These discussions, we hope, will shape professional norms and in turn inform institutional and policy level thinking. Overall, at the moment, our contribution is lying in kind of shaping that conversation around English assessment equity internationally. And through that, we're kind of promoting evidence-based ethical approaches that recognize linguistic diversity whilst supporting fair and appropriate decision making.
Wow, I love that answer. And I love that you focus on having the conversation. It's important to start there. I mean, it sounds like you're having lots of important conversations. So, Stephen, I'll turn this next question to you. How do you interpret and evaluate the level of security of the English test that LSAT reviews?
Another great question, Courtney. Having studied international security myself, the one thing I remember that all of the intelligence analysis and analysts agree on is that intelligence failure is always inevitable. That no intelligence or security system can ever be flawless, and there's always a way to break it or one. So in terms of and you know that goes for whichever industry we're talking about. So in terms of testing, I would urge all end users of tests when they hear claims about security from all the test providers, and that includes test providers with online tests and test providers with tests in test centers, to treat these claims with caution. And if possible, if you're interested in the security of a test, go and take it yourself and try it out under test conditions. That said, to answer your question, Courtney, in terms of security, we at ELSA will be guided by Firstly, the claims the providers make and our independent verification of these.
Mhm.
Obviously, also the security requirement of each different organization or each different customer, because requirements will vary
Exactly.
depending on what the use of the test is and also how they're purchasing or uh, using these tests. And thirdly, our own set of security recommendations for both online and offline tests, which we will be publishing in due course.
That was my next question, is if they were published. So thank you for
Not
answering
yet.
that question before I even had the opportunity to ask. Okay, so now we will transition to the theme of positioning, equity, and access. And Karen, I'd like to open this conversation starting with a question towards you. So we know that English today functions as a global language spoken in many varieties and contexts. So when you use the term standard in your title and work, how do you ensure it does not unintentionally reinforce a single dominant variety, but instead reflects global realities and diverse Englishes?
No, a great question, Courtney. Um, and it's also, we're not using the word standard as a shorthand for a single dominant variety of English, nor for first language speaker norms. We want to use the term to denote kind of a shared context sensitive reference points that support fairness and transparency in academic assessment across multilingual settings. Our standards then are more functional rather than varietal. We prioritize intelligibility, rhetorical effectiveness, and disciplinary appropriacy over accent, provenance, or conformity to, say, British or American norms. For us, standardization is more of a tool for equity and accountability, not linguistic homogenization.
Such a wonderful answer, such a thorough answer. I love that. It's just so wonderful to hear that you're just the way that you describe standard. I think it's very important for people to hear, especially because native speakerism is a whole nother
Mm,
conversation that we can have. But
mhm,
sticking with that sort of theme, so from a diplomatic and kind of educator lens, how
mhm,
does ELSA ensure representation of diverse voices, not only those rooted in Western or Anglo-centric frameworks, but others?
mhm. Again, great question. And I think the short answer to that is really by being intentional about who's included in ELSA, whose knowledge is valued, and how conversations are framed. We don't see diversity as kind of an add-on, but it's central to meaningful discussions about English language assessment. So, firstly, we're actively seeking global representation in our leadership, speakers and contributors to what we do. We'll be looking to include voices from a wide range of geographical, linguistic, and institutional contexts, including regions where English functions as an additional language rather than a dominant one.
Mhm.
And this will hopefully help to shift discussions away from a single normative standard of English and towards a more plural understanding of language use and assessment. Secondly, we're looking to emphasize a critical reflection of dominant frameworks. Rather than assuming Western or Anglo-centric models as the default, we hope to be able to create a space to question their relevance and impact in different contexts. And thirdly, and importantly, we hope to operate as a listening organisation. We value dialogue over prescription,
Mhm.
recognise that expertise is distributed and is also contextual. And hopefully, this stance will allow us to engage respectfully across differences in policy, culture, educational philosophy, and thereby help to prevent the marginalisation of perspectives that may not align with established norms. And finally, then, we're just committed to equity. And this is hopefully represented and reflected in our emphasis on professional collaboration. By foregrounding practitioner insight alongside research, we hope to support a more inclusive and balanced global conversation about English assessment, one that recognises linguistic diversity as a strength rather than as a problem to be managed.
I am so encouraged by that answer. You said two things that really said, well, you said a lot that stood out to me, and I'm sure to our audience as well, but you said we value dialogue over prescription. I think that's brilliant. And then
Mm.
also, representation in academia is extremely important. So the fact that we're having the conversation
Mm.
about it says a lot. So like I said, I'm just so encouraged by your response to that particular question. And I know that our audience is too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so now I want to switch my attention to the theme of the future of English assessment. The jury is out when it comes to different testing and examinations, and so I would like to see what ELSA has to say about the future of English assessment. So, Mir, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do you expect the future to involve fewer one-size-fits-all exams and more context-specific assessments for academic, workplace, or migration purposes?
Yes, I do. I think in future, English language testing will be should be more flexible to meet demand for different purposes. For example, study abroad, migration, or workplace need. And I believe that in future, the test provider will try to customize the content and test format to meet and satisfy the demand for the real user. Not a single version will fit for all purposes. And
Mhm.
we need to focus on real life uses of English communication and also the assessment framework. And I believe that we'll move towards more flexible testing and not just one test fit for all purposes.
Mhm. Okay, Stephen, so I'm switching my attention to you at this point. And so adding on to what Mir has just said, um, do you believe that we should have some kind of standardization among all the different tests that are offered right now? Many of them are one size fits all, but as Mir just said, perhaps we might see more context specific assessments. What does that do for standardization? How do you feel about that?
Yes, it's a complex one, because clearly we are already having, and we're going to have more and more different types of tests, and also what I may have referred to last time is that the all of these tests are really very different, and no one test is the same as the next one, and we shouldn't pretend that they are. So therefore, I think the answer to your question is that we need more clarity on the
Mhm.
differences between the different tests and different types of assessment. Um, and that's hopefully what ELSA will be providing soon.
Okay, great. And then I'm going to stay with you for this next question.
Okay.
How does ELSA ensure impartiality in its evaluations, particularly given the interest of test providers, and what processes do you follow if the provider disputes your findings?
Ah, yes, no, that's really important. Well, first of all, to be clear, we don't accept sponsorship or any kind of income from test providers. We will in the future welcome support from other non-test organizations, and we will work with bodies across the sector in different geographies as needed to help raise standards of clarity and transparency. Where one of us consults for a test provider, as I currently do, we will declare that openly and transparently, and also recuse ourselves from any work which may present any kind of conflict.
Mhm.
In
Great.
terms of a provider disputing our findings,
Mhm.
anything we set out will either be directly evidence-based, or we will state that it is an opinion.
Okay,
And therefore, where
great.
there is evidence, we're more than happy to share the evidence for our work with the test provider or any other appropriate audience, data protection permitting.
Absolutely. I love the transparency. I think that's extremely important. So thank you for sharing that with our audience. And so now I'm going to switch gears here and we'll talk about the theme of credibility, representation, and trust. So Karen, as institutions think carefully about credibility, what about ELSA's team and expertise do you think most reassures program directors?
Another great question. And I think building on from what Stephen has just said as well, I think what we hope at least will most reassure program directors coming to ELSAA is the depth, the diversity, and the independence of our professional advice. As you know from the first video we did with you, when you got to learn about our backgrounds, we all come at it from different perspectives and bringing that expertise with us. We're not a single provider or a commercial entity. We're a collective, ultimately, of internationally recognized experts in language assessment, applied linguistics, admissions, educational policy. We have a lot of different areas that we can draw on. And this breadth then ensures that our guidance, hopefully emerging from what we do, will reflect multiple contexts and sectors rather than just kind of narrow institutional interests. To do this, as Stephen was mentioning in the answer to the previous question, we're going to have a strong grounding in both research and practice. We're actively involved in designing, delivering, and evaluating English language assessments in our various roles, as well as implementing policy in universities and other organizations. And so this dual perspective that we have means that our advice can be theoretically informed whilst remaining sensitive to real world constraints, regulatory environments, and such matters, and of course, student impact, which is hugely important. And our credibility then hopefully is going to be very much reinforced by our commitment to evidence-based practice through professional dialogue, peer exchange, and critical debate. We really are looking to promote transparency, that clarity that we're looking for in this, validity, fairness, and the appropriate use of assessment results. Rather than prescribing solutions, we want to support program directors in making defensible and importantly context appropriate decisions. And so we hopefully see our role as kind of a trusted convener will hopefully reassure institutions. And by bringing together different voices from different regions, different traditions, we're hoping then that we'll be able to help program directors navigate complex questions about English language entry requirements with confidence, ensuring then that their decisions are informed by current thinking across the field and not simply isolated practice.
Something so important, and I'm sure what I hear today is reassurance and transparency, and these are things that program directors certainly need. As I said, the landscape continues to shift around assessment. So, with that said, I would like to begin to wrap up today's conversation. But before I do, I would love to turn and address you as the audience. We've covered a great deal today, from equity and evidence to access, security, and the future of English language assessment. I'd really like to hear your thoughts and perspectives on what ELSAA has shared in this particular episode. So, what resonated with you, and what challenged your thinking, and what questions are you still sitting with? English language assessment is not a static topic. It directly affects learners, educators, institutions, and global education and migration pathways. Our hope is that today's conversation encourages you to continue looking more deeply into that space and asking critical questions and thinking carefully about how standards are defined and applied in your own contexts. We also encourage you to stay connected with the work of ELSAA. This team is actively contributing to important global conversations around fairness, transparency, and responsibility in English language testing, and there is so much more ahead. This is just the beginning. This will not be our last conversation together. We're just getting started. So we will be back for at least one more episode of Coffee with Courtney, where we'll continue to unpack these issues and explore what they mean for institutions, educators, and learners worldwide. Thank you so much for joining us today. And until next time, take care and keep the conversation going.